All right. Welcome to a very special and impromptu episode of Bitches Love Sports. I'm your host, Jazz Monet, and you might be wondering why there wasn't any sort of intro or anything like that for this particular episode. So basically, a lot has been happening. If you've been keeping up with me through my community posts or through Twitter, then you know I'm in the process of moving. Now, what that means for me is that a lot of time has been going to basically keeping up with work, keeping up with moving, or keeping up with packing, so on and so forth. So that's why the content has been, lacking a little bit, which I said would happen. um, but I think even I didn't anticipate taking this sort of break for this long. And so I was kind of like thinking recently, okay, how can I get back in the groove of things? Because every time I take a break and come back, things are a little bit rusty. And that has been the case to the 10th power this time. So, like, I couldn't even find one of my lights, and I'm getting ready to set up, and I realized, like, my Wi Fi isn't working. Wi Fi on my laptop hasn't been working for a long time. It's hooked up with an Ethernet cable. So, like, I hadn't really thought about it. But normally when I record, I have an iPhone that's broadcasting the video and my audio is going through my laptop. And then like the graphics that I bring up are going through a laptop as well. And so I was like, okay, Wi-Fi is not working. How am I going to set this up? And so then I was like trying to, hey, you Side Harold, how's it going? I'm glad to see you in the comments. Um, since you're the only person in the comments right now, actually, Harold, let me know if you can hear me, because that's something else that I haven't been able to check. Um, but yeah, so I realized the Wi-Fi isn't working. So I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna have to use the camera on the laptop. It's not as good, whatever. And then I realized that and I keep looking, I'm looking this way because my laptop is over here. I'm trying to see if it's gonna reconnect. But all of a sudden, the internet on my laptop wasn't working either. So this might be a short episode because I've basically got an iPhone connected to the mobile hotspot on the phone that I normally use. I don't know when that data runs out, but I kind of already committed to going live. Like I'd already like posted the thumbnail and everything, which I did that through my laptop. So like my internet was literally working a few minutes ago, but I feel like everything that could possibly go wrong for this to happen actually did. So we're just going to talk about the news that's in the thumbnail and log off. Hopefully I get this fixed. I don't know how long it'll take them to get it fixed, and I'm literally going to be out of this apartment in like I think less than 2 weeks. Oh my God. It's happening. Um, so yeah, let's go ahead and chat about it. And as usual, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, you can post them in the chat. The only reason I'm jumping right into this instead of starting off with a bunch of shout outs and call outs, which I do have plenty of, like for this to be like the slow period of time, the sports world has been kind of busy, at least with stuff I'm interested in. But like I said, I don't know when this mobile hotspot runs out. So I just want to make sure that I get to the things that I wanted to get to today. And if you're over on the Twitter side and you want to make sure that I can see your comments and things of that nature, come over to the YouTube side, join us here, and I can for sure see your comments in the chat. So, anyway, long story short, the as the thumbnail says, Randy Gregory, who used to play for the Dallas Cowboys. As a matter of fact, the bulk of his career has been spent with the Dallas Cowboys. Since he left the Cowboys, he's been with the Broncos, he was with the 49ers, and this season he's supposed to be with the Buccaneers, right? But he is suing the NFL for discrimination related to fines over THC usage. So what I'm actually going to do real quick, and I just thought about doing this, like I said, Rusty. This entire episode is just like to get back in the groove and knock the rest off. So bear with me and let's just enjoy this story. Um, but I'm going to read part of an article from let's see who comes up. ESPN came up first. So I'll read part of the article from ESPN, and then I found a copy of the lawsuit, or I should say, I obtained a copy of the lawsuit. I think that's how, like, those of us in the journalism world are supposed to say that. And so we're going to go over the details in the lawsuit a little bit, but I'm just going to read part of this article just to get you up to speed on what's actually happening. So this is per ESPN.com, but it's an Associated Press article. And it reads, Randy Gregory sues NFL Broncos over $500,000 fines for THC use. It says Randy Gregory is suing the NFL and the Broncos, claiming discrimination over being fined $532,500 for taking medication containing THC for disabilities during his brief time in Denver. So, even though he did run into some issues with marijuana usage while he was with the Cowboys, it sounds like from jump he's addressing specifically the time that he was with the Broncos. Otherwise, for one thing, I'm pretty sure this fine amount would be a lot higher. Anyway, this particular article goes on to say, in the complaint filed this week in Arapahoe County District Court, the 31-year-old pass rusher, who now plays for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, said he was prescribed dronabinol for social anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorders, but was denied accommodations to treat those disabilities with that medicine. Okay, so let me pause right there and talk about this whole denied accommodation situation. Basically, the NFL has a super long list of banned substances, prohibited substances. A lot of them are not illegal, and a lot of them are things that would not be considered performance enhancement drugs by the traditional definitions of that, right? But what it is that if you have a prescription to take those drugs, you can basically, to put it in a nutshell, go to the NFL and say, hey, this is the issue that I'm having. A medical professional told me I can take this drug. Please approve me to take this drug so I can treat this issue that I'm having. And in a perfect world, ideally, the NFL would say, yes, we care about you as a player and a human being. So if a medical professional says you need this medication, we're going to authorize you to take it since you have a prescription. And apparently, in this particular situation, Randy Gregory says that this did not happen. And I will admit, that does kind of make me wonder how often this has happened to other players. Because, like I said, the list of drugs is very, very long. Um, I can't pull it up on the screen for you guys, but I'll see if I can pull it up on my phone screen real quick just to give you an example of how long it is. Because I downloaded the list earlier, and let's see if y'all see that. So this is a PDF. So I basically went to the NFLPA website and I downloaded this from there. So this is a PDF copy of the banned substances. And trust me, once I get my internet going, we're going to go over this again. So you'll be able to see it a little bit more clearly. But the first time that I looked into the NFL and their substance abuse policy, one of the things that stood out to me was that Adderall was on the list because this just so happened to be around this time when I was taking Adderall for the first time. And I was kind of like, that's kind of messed up. But then I thought about it and I was like, I kind of get it. Because if you've ever taken Adderall, and this doesn't happen apparently with 100% of the population, but there's a good number of us that Adderall makes us feel like damn near superhuman. Like I know for me, it helped me think clearer, make decisions faster. So like when I would take it before a roller derby game, I felt like a better athlete. I was able, like my reaction time was literally shorter. Um, and just the confidence with which I was able to go through my movements was a lot different. So I was like, okay, I get it. So that's just an example of like one of the legal drugs that's on this list that even if you have a prescription, if they find it in your system and you haven't gotten clearance from the NFL, they can still fine you for it, penalize you for it, whatever it is that's associated with that drug. So in the case of Randy Gregory, it was this hold on, let me look at it again. Dronabinol, which is synthetic THC or synthetic marijuana, and this was prescribed for him to be able to treat social anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder. And he went to the NFL and said, okay, please clear me to take this. And they didn't allow him to take it. And they also fined him for it, which is like a double-edged sword, right? It's like, okay, you have these conditions that are tough to deal with. You've gone to see a medical professional so you can better manage these issues. The medical professional said, hey, I think this is the best course of action for you. And you're like, you know what? I agree. Let's try it. I have to go through the proper channels in order to take this. And the NFL is like, nah, fuck your condition. No. Oh, you're going to try to treat yourself anyway? Well, now we're going to find you. Like, it's it's bananas to me. Anyway, the article continues. The NFL and the Broncos both declined to comment on Gregory's lawsuit when reached by the Associated Press on Friday. Now, it should be noted the Broncos cannot determine which substances are not allowed to be used. That is something that's negotiated between the NFL and the NFLPA. However, teams are responsible for enforcing certain aspects of the substance abuse policy. So I believe that's why the Broncos are also being named in this particular lawsuit. So the article goes on to give a little bit of background. It says the NFL no longer suspends players who test positive for THC, the chemical responsible for most of marijuana's psychological effects, but it remains among the league's banned substances subject to fines. The Broncos are named in the lawsuit, although teams don't have any role in the finding of players who violate the league's drug policies. The NFL and NFLPA substance of abuse policy is collectively bargained. Okay, that's what I just said. The complaint said Gregory was diagnosed with social anxiety disorder in 2021 and with post traumatic stress disorder in February of 2023. The Broncos and the NFL denied Gregory's request in March of 2023 to use dronabinol during non work hours, according to the complaint. 2 months later, his agent requested a therapeutic use exemption for Gregory, which was also denied. So they've basically gone through multiple attempts and multiple methods of trying to get this approved by the NFL. And they even said, hey, it's going to be used during non work hours. It's not going to be used like while he's on the field at practice. This is going to be non-use hours. We just don't want there to be a problem if you find it in his system later. And the NFL, for whatever reason, I would like to know the reason, said no. Um, so that's basically a background of what exactly happened. So when we look at the lawsuit, it gives us a little bit more detail, as lawsuits should, but it gives us a little bit more detail about um, what exactly Randy Gregory felt like was worth suing over. So let me pull that up real quick. All right, so it starts off with the most lawsuits. And I told this to somebody earlier. I was like, covering sports, I've had to read a lot of lawsuits. um, so it starts off with the typical listing of who the plaintiffs are, who the defendants are, and what the lawsuit is about to cover. So it says Plaintiff Randy Gregory, by and through his attorneys, Spencer J. Kontnick, Austin M. Cohen, and Matthew L. Finnickle of Kontnick Cohen LLC, hereby files this complaint and jury demand against defendants National Football League and Denver Broncos team under the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act. So there's a particular state law that is supposed to govern his option to be able to use this particular medication. And states as follows. This is a disability employment discrimination lawsuit. Randy Gregory is a husband and father. His job is playing linebacker in the NFL. He is also an individual living with multiple diagnosed disabilities which require ongoing monitored treatment. Mr. Gregory's treating physician described, sorry, this is small, hold on. Mr. Gregory's treating physician prescribed dronabinol, which is an FDA-approved THC synthetic cannabis to treat his disabilities. Dronabinol was an alternative to opioids and, hold on, this word always gets me, benzodiazepines. Okay, let me start that sentence over. Dronabinol was an alternative to opioids and benzodiazepines, which are fraught with significant side effects and addiction issues, which is true. However, THC is a banned substance in the NFL, and testing positive equates to escalating monetary penalties. So now we get into what the monetary penalties are and why Gregory took issue with them, which once I read them, I was like, okay, obviously. The first positive test is a penalty of half of a week's salary, and the fourth positive test and each positive test thereafter is a penalty of 3 weeks' salary. Thus, if Mr. Gregory takes his medication as prescribed, he is fined 75% of his salary and earns 25%. So that's kind of a big deal, even for someone who's making millions, even for someone who's making seven figures, only getting 25% of what you earn is definitely a big deal. So the document continues. Mr. Gregory requested an accommodation from the NFL and Broncos to consume dronabinol to treat his disabilities. Specifically, Mr. Gregory sought to consume dronabinol, which is synthetic cannabis, at the direction of his treating physician during non work hours. The NFL and the Broncos denied his request, noting that THC is a federally controlled substance. Since requesting an accommodation, Mr. Gregory has paid $532,500 in penalties to the NFL for consuming THC to treat his disabilities. Regardless of a positive test, Mr. Gregory is expected to play in every game, attend practice, attend media sessions, and fulfill his job responsibilities. In other words, he cannot be suspended for a positive test alone. Significantly, the NFL and the Broncos profited from Mr. Gregory's continued employment. So, in other words, his attorneys are saying you're not allowing him to properly treat his disabilities. And by properly, we mean according to what his physician said needs to happen in this particular situation. But since you're not suspending him, you're basically using him for his talents. You're benefiting from whatever that might bring to your team, whether it's victory on the field, benefits from his name, image, likeness, whatever. You're benefiting from that. But you're taking back money that he was paid over something that you're not suspending him for. So it's not like he's missing out on his salary because he's not working due to suspension. No, he's still showing up for work. You're just simply taking money away from him because he's taking medication that was prescribed to him by a physician and that is also legal in the state where he resides and where he works. So I get that the NFL might say, okay, it's a federally controlled substance. But if he's taking it during non-work hours, there's also a good chance that he's not taking it whenever he's in states where it's not legal. Now, I haven't read that part of the lawsuit to see if that's addressed, but that's just one of the things that popped up in my head as I was reading it and as it was discussing, when he was supposed to take it and how it was prescribed. So it goes on to say, Mr. Gregory has been diagnosed with social anxiety disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, which are DSM-5 codes F4010 and F3210. So DSM is basically a way that the medical profession goes about classifying various disabilities. Um, he further experiences ongoing physical pain due to many injuries that he sustained during his lifelong commitment to becoming a professional football player. Mr. Gregory's disabilities have historically had a negative impact on his life. Mr. Gregory's job exacerbates the symptoms of his disabilities, and in turn, his disabilities negatively impact his ability to perform his responsibilities as a professional football player, both on and off the field. Specifically, Mr. Gregory's disabilities directly affect his ability to focus and perform in stressful and high pressure situations, study the playbook and film, interact with coaches and teammates, and engage with the media. The medication dronabinol prescribed by his physician is the best treatment option for Mr. Gregory. Mr. Gregory is entitled to the full protection of Colorado anti discrimination laws. The NFL and Broncos ignored Colorado state law and have refused to engage in good faith in the interactive process with Mr. Gregory. It is a violation of CADA for the NFL and the Broncos to financially penalize Mr. Gregory for consuming prescribed dronabinol to treat his disabilities while simultaneously benefiting from his continued employment. The NFL and the Broncos are not above the law. So that's the introduction of it. It goes on to list parties, some of the more technical things that have to be in lawsuits, like the jurisdiction and venue, procedural requirements, and then we get to there's a section that talks a little bit more in detail about his disabilities and what they do, which we'll probably go over in another episode when we follow up on this case. And then there's the part where we talk about what he's expecting to get from the NFL. So let's see if we scroll. This is a 14-page document. So there are two claims for relief here. The first claim for relief, let's go back. I hate doing this on the phone, y'all. The first claim for relief says Mr. Gregory hereby incorporates the allegations in the preceding paragraphs as if fully set forth therein. So, in other words, everything that he talked about up until that point applies to what they're about to list. And actually, let's go ahead and fast forward to All right, so it goes into detail. The NFL discriminated against Mr. Gregory in violation of, we'll just say in violation of a law. It's a lot of letters and numbers. And it's implementing regulations by engaging in discriminatory acts or practices, including but not limited to the following: failing to engage in the interactive process with respect to Mr. Gregory's request for an accommodation prior to submitting a TUE, which I forget what that stands for, but I think that has to do with his request to use it for therapeutic reasons. Failing to engage in the interactive process with respect to Mr. Gregory's request for an accommodation after submitting a TUE. Failing to provide a reasonable accommodation to Mr. Gregory in the form of a TUE, despite the NFL's knowledge that dronabinol was prescribed to treat Mr. Gregory's disabilities. Failing to meaningfully and in good faith communicate with Mr. Gregory concerning his disability and his requested accommodation, denying Mr. Gregory a reasonable accommodation to use dronabinol based on his disability, and subjecting Mr. Gregory to unreasonable and continuous drug testing, discipline, and fines for his use of dronabinol to treat his disabilities. The requested accommodation could have been reasonably accomplished by the NFL, which is hard to argue with, especially considering the fact that they were requesting for him to be able to use this outside of work hours. Um, so it goes on from there to say Mr. Gregory has been injured and aggrieved by the NFL's discrimination. And Mr. Gregory is entitled to damages, including but not limited to repayment of the monetary fines that Mr. Gregory was required to pay, including interest to the fullest extent permitted by law and an amount to be determined at trial. Mr. Gregory is entitled to damages and relief to the full extent permitted by the law and an amount to be determined at trial. Mr. Gregory hereby incorporates the allegations. Oh, wait, this is the second part of the claim, so it kind of starts off like the first. But towards the end of this, it goes on to once again basically mention the same thing about damages and about fines, but this time it's talking about the Broncos as opposed to the NFL. So basically, there's a separate section for each particular entity. So he's asking for relief. He's asking that the court assume jurisdiction. And other than that, he's just asking for a trial by jury. So now, when it comes to the damages, that's where things might get interesting in terms of what he's awarded, because the damages could include everything from anything that he did miss out on. So let's say that there's documented evidence that his social anxiety caused him to have to turn down a potential money making opportunity, or if his attorney decides to go that route, they could say not only did he miss out on those opportunities, but because he missed out on those opportunities, there are other opportunities that he wasn't offered. And we're going to make the assumption or estimate that those offers were worth X dollar amount. So you take that amount and then you add interest. And if you can convince a jury that those claims are reasonable, that amount could actually get quite high. So while a lot of the headlines are talking about this, $500,000 number, the amount, assuming that a jury rules in Randy Gregory's favor, the amount that he ultimately ends up being awarded, once you consider interest and all the costs that he mentioned in the lawsuit, as well as other damages, which could be, like I said, loss of income, loss of potential income, like I just mentioned. We could also get into discussions about emotional damage. That number could actually end up being like pretty high. So I would definitely say keep an eye on that. Let me take a second and read some of y'all's comments, and then I'm going to get back into discussing this particular situation. Brian Bradford said, "Is Dak's mess all over and done now? And is Randy Gregory still on the team?" So Randy Gregory is supposed to be with the Buccaneers this coming year. He was with the 49ers. You're right about that part, but he's supposed to be with the Buccaneers this coming year. As far as Dak's situation, I need to look into it. I haven't looked into it in a couple of days. Last time I checked, there was a lot of back and forth that was interesting to me as a person who likes to dig into those things, but it was the kind of thing that I had to put a lot of thought into how to make that easily digestible for the average person who hasn't been keeping up with those legal matters. I think I did an episode where I talked about the anti-SLAPP countersuit that was filed by the attorneys of the accuser. And so from there, there's just been a lot of amendments to various answers and countersuits. From my perspective, and this hasn't been scheduled, at least not the last time I looked at it. And if I have time, if I have the ability, because Brian, I'm not sure if you saw the beginning, but I'm having Wi-Fi issues, so I don't know how long I'm going to be able to stay online here. But if I have the ability, I can look and see if there are any other updates. But it looks like both sides, oddly enough, are wanting that situation to go to trial. So basically, the accuser of Dak Prescott wants to have the opportunity to prove that she had a point and that this wasn't all an attempt at extortion. And Dak Prescott obviously wants to clear his name. Um, and so they both seem to have their reasons for wanting to go to trial. There has been another motion for it to be dismissed, which is basically something that happens if the judge says, hey, there's not enough movement happening with this particular case. So if there's not anything significant happening and this isn't going anywhere, we're just going to go ahead and dismiss the case. And that's set for a particular date. I don't think that date has passed, but there has been movement since then. So I don't see that happening. Um, but yeah, if both sides get their way, there's a possibility it could end up going to trial. And that's all I'm going to say about that until I get a chance to look at some more documents related to that. But Randy Gregory is supposed to play with the Buccaneers this year, and that could be part of the reason that he's filing this particular lawsuit now. He's not with the Broncos anymore, obviously, and maybe he's moving into a situation where he's like, "Hey, I really need to be able to take the medication that allows me to treat these particular disabilities." So before things get started with this new team, let me go ahead and put these legal matters out there, see if we can get this resolved and see if we can get the NFL to allow me to use what my physician has prescribed for me. Um, so the thing that really interests me about this particular case with Randy Gregory is not only the fact that I like seeing NFL players stand up for themselves and say, hey, the NFL is not Congress, the NFL is not God. I have a right to be able to treat these disabilities. I've gone about it through legal means. Allow me to do that. Like, I even went through the proper channels to ask for your permission to do that, and you don't have a good reason for denying me the opportunity to do that, right? But there's not only that aspect of it, but there's also the fact that depending on how this all plays out, it could have much larger implications for how the NFL both writes and enforces its substance abuse policy going forward. Like I said, and like I showed you guys, there is a very long list of substances that are banned to the point where they can't be used or at least require permission from the NFL to be used, even if they are prescribed. And so learning that Randy Gregory has such serious disabilities and that the NFL denied him the option of using prescribed medication despite the seriousness of his disabilities really makes me wonder how they've handled other such situations. Because the first time I saw this super long list of banned substances, I'm like, okay, well, at least they have a way of going to the NFL and saying, this is prescribed, this is something I need. And all they have to do is get approved and then they'll be able to take whatever they need to take in order to properly function in society. And now I'm just like, okay, how many disabilities in the NFL are being like not treated or being undertreated because the NFL, for whatever reason, is denying these players the option to use prescribed medication? Um, and that's a really scary thought whenever you think about it. So, a big part of the reason why I'm covering this and why I'm rooting for him to see some level of success in this situation is because this would not only be good for him and be justice for him, but it could also mean a big change in how this is handled for players across the board. Now, I'm going to go back to the NFLPA website and just read a couple of the things that it mentions um, about the NFL substance abuse policy. So let's see. I think I have to pull up the webpage again. And Brian, if you have any more questions, like feel free to keep posting them in the chat. Okay, so on the NFLPA website, they have a particular section that is related to the drug policies. And if I tap on the section that says, I need to know what substances I'll be tested for, it says the SOA annual test for the following substances: cocaine, synthetic marijuana, amphetamines, which includes Adderall, which, like I said, it really does make you feel superhuman, and that's part of the reason why it is an amphetamine. Opiates, opioids, PCP, and MDMA. The PES annual test for the following categories of substances: anabolic, anabolic and androgenic steroids, protein and peptide hormones, so that's like HGH, anti-estrogenic agents, selective androgen receptor modulators, diuretics, stimulants, and gene doping. And then there's a link that says check out banned substances here. So that's where I got the long list that I showed you guys earlier. So, pretty long list. And part of me actually kind of hopes that Randy Gregory is doing this not only for himself, but also for the other players who might be dealing with the same thing. And I'm going to be honest, one of the things that I thought about as I was reading this lawsuit, because like I said, as crazy as it is, covering sports, I end up reading a lot of lawsuits, right? But one of the things that I noticed, I'm like looking at these attorneys representing him, and I'm like, okay, first of all, not every petition is created equally. There are some legal petitions that I read, and I'm just like, who wrote this? And was your client actually still comfortable with you representing them after, like, did they see this? Because there are some of these petitions that I read that I'm just like, you should have had somebody do this for you, or like your client really needs to find somebody else because you are not good at this. Basically, like there's a certain set of skills that I think it takes to write a good petition. So, for example, one of the things that I really liked about this one was that when they talked about the physical injuries that Randy Gregory's been dealing with, they mentioned not only his time with the NFL, but they said specifically that he's dedicated his entire life to becoming a professional football player. So they're like, we're not just going to appeal to, his level as a professional. We are going to appeal to the fact that he has actually dedicated his entire life to this, which I haven't looked into Randy Gregory's entire history, but a lot of professional football players have been playing since Pee Wee. So they're basically saying, like, yo, he's dedicated his entire life to this. And now he wants to take this prescribed medication just so he can continue doing this. And even though he's dedicated his entire life to being part of the NFL is still, for some reason, which there seems to be no good reason based on this lawsuit, for some reason they are denying him that. And so just the things that they mentioned, the way that it's worded, the fact that they were careful to make this about not only anti-discrimination, but a particular anti-discrimination law for this particular state tells me something about the level of care that went into this position. It tells me something about the level of experience and education of his attorneys. And it tells me something about how determined they are to see justice in this particular situation. And so, noting that, I went and I looked at the attorneys who are representing him here, and I noticed it's three attorneys. Now, keep in mind, the name of the law firm is Kontnick Cohen LLC, and the attorneys listed, their last names are Kontnick, Cohen, and Finnicle. So, based on this, and I do need to look into this, so pardon me if I'm incorrect on any of this. Looks like not only does he have a team of three very good attorneys, but two of them are partners for this particular law firm. That's kind of a big deal. And it kind of makes me wonder if Randy Gregory isn't the face of a situation that's actually being perpetuated and possibly bankrolled by someone else, or a different entity or a larger entity that has an invested interest in actually seeing this pushed through. And I say that because, like, quiet as it's kept, one thing to think about is the fact that Jerry Jones has actually been very instrumental in some of the changes that have come about in the NFL when it comes to testing for drugs, including marijuana. So when I see a roster of attorneys like this, I'm like, did he get help? Did he get it from Jerry Jones? Because the Cowboys always seem to really like Randy Gregory, right? Um, when he ended up leaving the team, it felt like a very unfortunate set of circumstances. It didn't feel like the team was like ready to get rid of him. They just, he found a better fit in Denver, and I don't even remember if they offered him more money. I think if they did, it wasn't even that much more, right? So we have a player who had an issue with marijuana usage that was loved by the organization. And Jerry Jones, even after this particular player left the organization, still has played a role in trying to change how the NFL addresses testing specifically for marijuana, right? And then you also have to look at the fact that the NFL has been doing a lot themselves in determining how cannabis can be used for pain management and injuries. Now, Randy Gregory, according to this lawsuit, is dealing with a lot more than that. But one of the things that I remember, and like I said, when we follow up on this, I'll be able to go into more detail about this. But every year, the NFL gives out multiple grants. I'm not talking about one or two. I'm talking about 5, 10, 15. If you start looking at the different rounds of funding, and they're related to player health and safety. Some of those are related to technological advances, like what they've done in terms of finding better gear, better helmets. Some of those are related to things like how they figure out stats for certain things. Like I did an episode where I talked about some of the like new equations and things like that that they're thinking about implementing. And some of those are related to things like this, like substances. And so this past year, one of the contests that they ran where people could apply for funding, um, every single winning entry was related to marijuana and the use of cannabis, right? So that to me says, okay, the NFL is trying to figure this out. So if they're actually trying to figure out how cannabis can be used by their players and what the benefits are, why would they deny a player like Randy Gregory the option to use a prescribed synthetic marijuana substance? And so I'm like, is it that they don't care about the fact that his most major disabilities are not physical ones, that they're social anxiety and post-traumatic stress? Um, is it because they don't want something like this moving forward until they feel like they can benefit from it in a certain way? I'm really not sure. That's the part that's puzzling because all the moves that the NFL has been making suggest that they are in support of, basically relaxing their stance on marijuana usage and giving players the option to use marijuana. But then we have this situation. Now, granted, this situation was from a couple years ago. So maybe he's suing for something that would no longer be the case if he were to go back to the Broncos. But just as I start putting the pieces together and connecting names and dates, there are just certain things that like don't necessarily seem to fit in terms of making this one particular situation make sense. So that's why I'm like, I feel like there are other people or other entities at play here that we might find out as more information comes out about what happened. And what I consider to be the biggest question of this entire situation, which is why? Why did they not allow him to use prescribed medication in a state where it was legal? Like that whole thing is bananas to me. Like social anxiety and post-traumatic stress, those are not like minor disabilities. Like those are things that can majorly impact a person's life. And so I'm just like, it doesn't sit well with me that he wasn't allowed to use this medication. Let me read some more of y'all's comments real quick because they're starting to scroll off the page. Let's see. Brian said, so Randy Gregory did get fully reinstated to the NFL from all his suspensions. Yes. So according to the lawsuit, when he was with the Broncos, they had stopped suspending him. I think by that time they had stopped suspending players at all for marijuana usage, but he was still being fined. So he was with the Broncos, then he was with the 49ers, and now he's with the Buccaneers. But he's still been fined for using. So basically, they told him he couldn't use the medication. He's been using it anyway because a physician prescribed it, and it's been legal. And so they continued to fine him, but not suspend him. So one of the things mentioned in the lawsuit was like, hey, he's still been working. He didn't miss out on this income. He didn't miss out on pieces of his salary because he wasn't allowed to work. Y'all have still been making this man work and just not paying him or taking money out of his check. That's really messed up. Eastside Harold says, Jazz, do you smoke the ganja? Socially. I'm not one of those people who does it every day. I don't have like a plug, like I'm not buying regularly, but like I have been around friends and they've been like, hey, let's yada yada yada. And I'm like, okay. Or especially like so like with Derby, we traveled a lot and we would end up going to states where it was legal. And I would indulge then, like Phoenix. I love Phoenix. The folks at the dispensaries there are like super nice. And they have like really cool. Okay, so I'm going off on a tangent, but I'm gonna tell y'all if y'all ever visit Phoenix, and if y'all want to know the name of this place, let me know because I can't remember the name of it right off the top of my head. I actually think I still have a bag from the place right over there. But it's this one particular dispensary and they have different locations, right? And it's like if you go and buy something at each particular location, then you get like these special deals. And they have like really good deals anyway, like buy one get one free, like big discounts on pre-rolls, but it's like a different deal every day. So it's like if you're going to visit Phoenix for a few days, like you can go to all these locations, take advantage of the deals, and then you can also get like an even bigger discount or an even bigger coupon. And it's not just on like pre-rolls and flour and stuff like that. It's also on paraphernalia and on gummies and on other edibles. But what's really cool is that like they keep your information in the system. So when you go to another location, like they can like pull up what you got before and kind of like see what your preferences are. And they're like, oh, you went to such and such location. Or if you go to the same location twice, they're like, oh, I remember you. So and so worked it. Like they're just really hospitable, super dope people. Um, so yeah, I've had edibles more than I've smoked, but I have done both. I'm not opposed to it. I don't have a problem with it. It's all good. Brian said apparently Randy Gregory didn't re-sign with the Cowboys, and it was because of a clause in his contract about being suspended. Um, yeah, possibly. There was a time when he would have been suspended, and I do need to look into the exact timeline. I don't when he got to the Broncos, I don't think that it was a situation where they just chose not to suspend him and the Cowboys did. There was actual change in how the NFL enforced that part of their substance policy. So no one gets suspended for marijuana usage now. Oh, asterisk about being suspended. So yeah, no one gets suspended for marijuana usage now, and they even only do drug testing from like mid-April to early August. So like they've made a lot of changes in the drug policy and how it's enforced. However, as I said, my main concern with this particular issue isn't so much about, players should be allowed to use marijuana, which I 100% think that they should be, but my bigger concern in this particular situation is the fact that we see a situation where a player was prescribed a legal substance that was going to be used to treat actual disabilities, actual serious disabilities. And in order for him to legally take something that he was prescribed to take, he had to go to the NFL and get permission. And they denied him that permission. And because they chose to deny him that permission, they then decided to test him and find him repeatedly. It just feels like a very dismissive way to deal with the player's issues. It feels like abuse of the system by an entity with more power. I'm I don't like that at all. So that's where we are. So hopefully that gets everybody up to speed on the situation and what it is. Hopefully I can get everything ironed out with my Wi-Fi and with my internet so that when we go back and dive into this or even if I decide to like dive into something else, like I've got interviews lined up next week and I'm like I would really like to be able to properly execute those interviews. Um I think worst case scenario, if I don't get it sorted out, I'll just have to find somewhere else to be able to do the shows. So we'll just see how that goes. But if you've been tuning in this long, thank you so much for joining me for this late night episode of Bitches Love Sports. I definitely appreciate so many of you popping back in on this like spur in the moment impromptu episode, especially with me being gone for so long. So, like I said, this is just my attempt to get my feet wet, get back into a routine. So, short episode, one topic. But there's so many things that I want to talk to you guys about. There have been like the craziest of headlines when it comes to the Cowboys and just how people are handling who is and who isn't showing up to OTAs. Um, there's a lot that's been going on with the WNBA, which, if you follow me on Twitter, you've seen a lot of my thoughts on that. I do like to write when I get a chance, but I also want to be able to talk to you all about it and be able to look at y'all's comments and questions in the chat. Um, so yeah, women's sports and WNBA. There's some awesome sports related content that's coming out that I want to talk about. So there's a lot coming up that I want to talk to you guys about that hopefully I can actually get my full setup going so we can have like a fully produced episode. Let's see, what do y'all have to say? We we love the late night grown and sexy night. I guess I don't think there's anything grown and sexy about a t-shirt and me sitting on a couch, but whatever does it for you, Eastside Herald. Oh, also, I guess I should check. So I can get super chats now, and I with this setup, I don't really know how to check them. So that's another reason why I want to be able to fix the setup. Because I can't really tell if I got them. So if anybody did happen to send me a super chat and I just didn't read it or I don't see it, I'm sorry, and I'll figure out something to do about that later. We're gonna get this all sorted out, but I'm having like I don't know. The universe is working against me tonight, and I got to figure that out. But whether I got any or not, I appreciate y'all for showing up, for being active in the chat, and for supporting me, even though I've been away for so long. I'm gonna be in Austin for less than 2 weeks, and then I'll be moving to a new place in Frisco, Texas, where I know for a fact the internet will already be set up because somebody's working on that. So whatever. I just got to ride this out for a few more days. Brian said, "What do you think about the Caitlin Clark hip check situation?" Um, Let me get a sip of water and I'll answer that for you because my throat is like, even my throat is like, we're out of practice, bitch. We're tired. Like, I don't know if y'all can hear it. I can feel it when it becomes harder for me to talk, and it makes me feel like, okay, can they hear the change in my voice? But like, have you ever like worked out regularly and then like you go a little bit of time without working out and then you're like, dang, this is harder than it was a few weeks ago. That's how my vocal cords feel right now. I'm like, physically, I'm not tired, but my throat and my voice are just like, yo, are we done? Or can we not do this right now? Give me a second. Okay, so the Caitlin Clark Hitchcock situation, this is something else that I'll probably go into more detail on again at a later date. I wanted to actually dedicate an entire episode to what's been going on with the WNBA and also what happened with Monica McNutt. It's been hard to work this into my schedule, but honestly, I think it was overblown. Um, I get the fact that it was a non-basketball play. And so that seems to be the line of demarcation for a lot of people. Whenever people say, well, the WNBA has always been physical. And they're like, oh, well, they're normally physical during the course of gameplay. You know, in this particular situation, the ball hadn't even been inbounded. Okay, I'll give you that. But and Brian, I don't know if you follow me on Twitter, but I actually wrote like a pretty long post about my thoughts on the situation and also how it's been covered. I feel like in the grand scheme of things, it was a relatively minor moment that could have remained as a minor moment had people not been so quick to Kate for Caitlin Clark. It was a play where nobody was hurt. Was it rude? Yes. Was it uncalled for? Yes. Should it have been a flagrant foul? Foul? Yes. People calling for the suspension of Kennedy Carter, I think, is uncalled for. Um, I was watching that game between the Chicago Sky and the Indiana Fever, and it was actually a really close game. It was an exciting game. It came down to the last possession, and there's so many storylines that can be discussed related to that game. There are so many exciting things that happened during that game that could be discussed in relation to that game. And I was just like, why are y'all focusing so much on this one play? Like, I get it, it was rude, it was messed up. But is it really something that we need to talk about for like 2 days? Not when so many other great things were happening on the court. And by great, I don't even necessarily mean good. I just mean like significant. There were so many other significant things that happened, not only in that particular game, but also within the WNBA over the course of that weekend. You know what I'm saying? So, like the fact that they decided to lock in on that one particular moment and hone in on it and not let it go, it was just really weird energy for me. Um, and one of the things that I mentioned in the post, as a matter of fact, I'll just pull up the post and read it, and that might kind of get me to where I want to be in terms of other things that I want to say about this particular situation. Okay, so I made the post 3 days ago. If you want to go back and look at it, but I said the current mainstream coverage of the WNBA is proof that more is not always better. This morning on Unsportsmanlike, that's a show on ESPN, Evan Cohen brought up the question of what the media can and should do now, with it being that they can't go back in time and pay more attention to all the great WNBA stories that were missed. So basically, they were talking about how Caitlin Clark was getting a lot more attention than other players who had also accomplished great things in the league. And she hasn't really done anything yet. And so Evan Cohen asked a question, which is a good question. He's like, okay, well, we can't go back and do anything about that. So what should we do? What should we do now? Like, we didn't pay enough attention to those stories. Should we just not pay attention to good stories now? Um, and so I continued. I said, crazy thing is, there's no need to go back. Start doing better now. So many stories are still being missed because new eyes on the WNBA are focused on the wrong things. We spent days discussing Kennedy Carter and Caitlin Clark, two players from two teams with losing records, while the Connecticut Sun's undefeated season hasn't been mentioned on anyone's A block. And what about Asia Wilson averaging a double double so far this season, hopefully on her way to being named league MVP? Because a lot of people felt like she was snubbed last year. Brianna Stewart got it last year. And people were like, Asia Wilson deserved that. She didn't get it. And it kind of feels like, she's taking that personally a little bit this season. And then I said, how about what college athletes can learn from how Angel Reese turned NIL deals into professional revenue streams and potentially a renaissance for Reebok women's sneakers? So before Angel Reese got into the league, no women in the WNBA were wearing Reebok. Like, she's the first woman to go into the WNBA and be repping the Reebok brand. So that's kind of a big deal in itself. Even the Sky Fever game itself, I watched it. It was exciting, a riveting nail biter that came down to the last possession and gave the Fever their second win of the season, despite them coming in as major underdogs. It was a continuation of the story from the NCAA Women's Tournament of 2023 when Clark and Reese faced each other in the title game. Two high profile competitors who instantly captured fan bases whose demographics are about as close to natural rivals as the modern human experience will allow. But by all means, let's focus on 2 seconds of aggression where no one was hurt, unless you count a lot of poorly expressed feelings of new WNBA enthusiasts. And while focusing on that moment, they not only refused to acknowledge but actively dismissed the voices and perspective of the women who played the game and have covered it for years, all for the sake of boiling down a complex coalescence of events, circumstances, and catalysts that brought us to this point into a reduction of narratives about jealousy and envy. It's as though the actual game means less to them than the fact that they finally have video evidence to support this idea. They're so desperate to believe that they repeatedly disparage and insult the very women they claim their coverage is helping. Here's an idea. Instead of just saying that attention on Caitlin Clark will improve coverage of all teams and players, how about you just improve your coverage of all teams and players? But I suppose baseless claims, pointed fingers, and shirked responsibilities are the best complements of hurt feelings, clickbait narratives, and perpetuated stereotypes. It would be irresponsible of me to expect anything else. Almost as irresponsible as the half baked journalism that's capitalizing off the rise in popularity of women's sports. Anyway, I gotta finish packing. And if you read this far, just know I appreciate you and can't wait to dive into this even more. So, in the section where I talked about them being dismissive of women who have played the game, I was talking not only about Monica McNutt, but other women who were trying to add some nuance and context to the situation by pointing out the fact that one, Kennedy Carter has never been exactly the poster child of good sportswomanship, and two, Caitlin Clark had elbowed her pretty hard before she went and pushed her. And so there were multiple people. The first people who come to mind are Tarika and Monica. And they both made the point that, like, hey, we're not saying this is okay. We're not saying that this is something that should be allowed. But what we're saying is that we don't think this is personal against Caitlin Clark. We think anybody who elbows Kennedy Carter like that should expect her to retaliate in some way, even if it is a dirty play. So let's focus less on, okay, this is something against Caitlin Clark, and just look at what exactly happened here, which means we also have to look at the player who committed this action and think about, okay, is this actually Caitlin Clark being picked on? Is this something that only happens to her? Or did she happen to pick the wrong one that day? And that's what these women were saying. Like, okay, she just picked the wrong one that day. And maybe what Kennedy Carter did was messed up, but that's what she does. Like, don't make this about Caitlin Clark. It's not about Caitlin Clark, you know? And what upset me about the responses to that was the fact that there were so many people who came behind those women and didn't even take into consideration their perspective on Kennedy Carter being elbowed, didn't even bring it up. As a matter of fact, I want to say it was Shannon Sharp, because he was on the episode with Monica McNutt and Stephen A. Smith. And he said something about how the Indiana Fever teammates should have retaliated on behalf of Caitlin Clark. Like, they should have had her back. They shouldn't let anything like that stand, because if you do something like that to a teammate, everybody needs to take responsibility in handling it. And I'm like, okay, so you're saying the proper course of action for Caitlin Clark being pushed would be for the entire team to retaliate. So wouldn't that mean that if Kennedy Carter was retaliating in response to being elbowed, that she also did the right thing? In which case, why are we even discussing this? Because based on your logic, when someone lays a dirty hit on you or someone's too physical with you, there's supposed to be retaliation, which is exactly what Kennedy Carter did. So why are we upset? You know? So it was just really disappointing to see so many people, especially so many men, who are like, we're covering women's sports, so we're the heroes. Look at us doing great things for women's sports. And it's like, but everything that you're saying is making all the women in the WNBA sound and look bad, except for one. So if that's your idea of coverage that's supposed to help the sport, you can keep it. Anyway, I don't even know if I'm addressing the right thing anymore. Let me look at more of your comments. Um, Brian said, yeah, you didn't like the men on ESPN talking about it. ESPN, TNT, NBA TV, none of them. And it's not so much that I don't like the men on ESPN talking about it, it's that I don't like the way that they're talking about it. Because if you listen to what they're saying, they're essentially like, oh, Caitlin Clark is being picked on because all the other women in the WNBA are jealous. Um, and that's just a really, know if they are being intentionally rude or if they're being tone deaf. And by tone deaf, what I mean is there is a certain segment of new WNBA fans who is using this moment with Caitlin Clark as an excuse and as a reason to say some really messed up things about Black women under the guise of fandom. So basically, them being Caitlin Clark fans gives them clearance to say all this messed up stuff that a lot of us can recognize as misogynoir and racism, but there are other people who should be calling it out who just don't seem to be seeing it at all. And so when you have men like Stephen A. Smith and like Shannon Sharp go on national television and say what they said, and treat Monica McNutt how they did, it's like they're adding fuel to that fire. And so a lot of us are just like, yo, y'all are saying y'all are trying to help, but you're really not helping. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, you're not making these women look good. You're not making the sport look good. You are focusing on things that actually make these women look bad. Chill the fuck out, you know? Eastside Herald said Angel Reese is growing on me. She's starting to look fine. Angel Reese has been fine. I don't know where you've been. Brian continues, what about Stephen A. Smith saying he made the WNBA? Oh, Lord. They were not talking about the WNBA 3 years ago, per Monica, and Monica was correct. SAS was talking bullshit. Yeah, I addressed that in another post, and in a nutshell, I basically said Monica McNutt said that Stephen A. Smith, she didn't even say ESPN, she didn't say First Take. She actually specifically said, I'm talking about you and your platform, Stephen A. She said he wasn't talking about the WNBA like this 3 years ago, and he wasn't. And honestly, if you listen to his soliloquy that he did on his podcast, he actually proves her right, because he didn't prove that he actually did. All he did was say a bunch of stuff about why he didn't. He's like, oh, well, the WNBA wasn't as popular. These topics weren't percolating back then. Okay, so you have your reasons for why you didn't. The fact of the matter still stands, you didn't. And that's what she was saying. So she was right. So it really pissed me off that he said that she lied, because I'm like, you're saying that she lied, but then you go on to support everything that she said. I mean, just because you have a reason for doing what you did doesn't mean you didn't do what you did. So I mean, if you feel a way about it, if it makes you feel self-conscious, just do better. But don't try to disparage this woman for calling out something that we all saw. Um, I thought that was a real bush league move on the part of Stephen A. Smith. And if I'm being honest, he's made a lot of questionable moves recently, where it just seems like there's a lot of things that he's taken personally, and a lot of the things that he says seem to be in response to criticism, or him taking out his feelings on people who or groups who don't necessarily deserve it. It's just really weird energy coming from Stephen A. for about the past year or so. I hope he gets that sorted out. So, okay. So it looks like that's all the questions for now. We've been on for an hour. Like I said, I don't know how much data this is using on my mobile hotspot. I'm just glad I had a mobile hotspot that I could use so that I could still go live despite whatever's happening. Oh, and it looks like the internet on my laptop is working, but I'm not about to hook it up and do all the stuff. So just know, I mean, for one, the NFL is going to have a response to the Randy Gregory lawsuit, and so will the Broncos. So I'm going to keep an eye on that. I'm going to have updates on the Dak situation. We're going to talk about the WNBA. We're going to talk about women's sports. We're going to talk about some of this awesome sports content. Y'all know me. Anybody who's been watching me for a while, during the summer, I love discussing the sports content. Like, yes, there's stuff going on with OTAs, and, training camp is coming up, and we'll talk about all the Cowboy stuff. But, I apologized in advance for how much Chicago Bears content y'all would be seeing from me, with it being that Caleb Williams went to the Bears. I love Caleb Williams, so yes, we will be hearing about him. And the Bears are going to be on Hard Knocks, so yes, we will be talking about that. We're going to talk about this documentary that Stephen A. put out about sports podcasters and independent sports personalities, because I can't wait to see what he has to say about sports content creators. Because when he brought it up on First Take, it just didn't exactly sound like what he was going to say was going to be positive. And with me being a content creator and me having so many friends who are content creators, I'm just really curious about what the narrative is that he's trying to put out there about independent sports content creators. So we're definitely going to talk about that. We've got Clipped that just started on Hulu about the whole situation with the Clippers and Donald Sterling. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I want to discuss, that, like, I feel like I've made enough progress in my packing to where I'm like, okay, I can start working this in my schedule a little bit. So I'm gonna try to get back into a groove, y'all. And y'all showing up tonight definitely helps me, because like when I can show up late and impromptu like this, and this many of y'all, once again, mostly on the Twitter side, we're gonna work on bringing y'all over to YouTube. I need y'all over here, especially now that I'm monetized. But wherever you're tuning in from, the fact that so many of y'all showed up, it's really encouraging. It really makes me feel good. So I'm excited to get back into the swing of things. But on that note, I need to build up my endurance as well as getting back into a routine. So my vocal cords are telling me it's time to go. I'm gonna listen. I'm gonna log off, and well, damn. My lights are done too. So on that note, oh God, this has been another episode of Bitches Love Sports. I'm Jazz Monet, and I'm out.